Does the district need a levy? So I think we need to answer that question. Has the district been financially responsible? If the answer is yes, then to the first question, then I think the second question follows logically. So if you need more money, do you need more money because you haven't been fiscally responsible, or is there some other explanation? The third question is, and I think that needs to be addressed honestly and openly, especially with our parents, what are the effects of a failed levy? What would the district look like? What are the impacts? And is there a relationship between a strong community, a vibrant community, and a strong school system? You think there is? She does. She already voted yes. So hopefully we'll be able to answer those questions. Why does the district need a levy? If you can't see this, which I assume most of you can't, I have two pictures of storms on the screen. And one above the first storm says a decline in real estate value. We haven't seen these declines in real estate value, not that I'm telling you something you don't already know. We haven't seen these declines in real estate values since the Great Depression. And I'll show you a slide that sort of illustrates that. And I'll talk in a minute that the net effect of that for us is loss in revenue for the school district. Decrease in state funding. In my 16 years, I've not seen decrease in state funding. I've seen flat increases, I've seen nominal increases, but I've not seen decreases to this equivalent. Did anybody see the article that was in the Cleveland Plain Dealer a few days ago about funding for school districts and how it compared to school districts? If you didn't, it's a great article to see. And it also illustrates the fact that Willoughby Eastlake City Schools was one of the worst hit school districts in the entire state, actually. What that article showed was Northeast Ohio. So we have the convergence of a perfect storm. Declining home values and cut in state funding. Unprecedented cuts in state funding. But is this problem, I hope you can sort of see the screen. What you're seeing right now, it says school districts that are in fiscal caution, watch, or fiscal emergency. We're not in any of those right now. We are on the watch list, however. But this is what it looks like at the end of last fiscal year. There's color on there. Color on there is a bad thing. Look what it looks like projected on the next fiscal year. If you can see that, it's more red, more yellow, more blue, and then the next year. What these slides illustrate is that the problem facing Willoughby Eastlake City Schools is not unique to Willoughby Eastlake City Schools. Districts all over the state are facing the same challenges that we are. However, whose problem is Willoughby Eastlake City Schools? It's our problem. Is the state going to bail us out? Does anybody have any faith that the state is going to come through with a couple $1 million, $5 or $6 million to give to Willoughby Eastlake City Schools? I don't think so. Is Euclid, can I call Euclid up and say, hey, can you slide us a couple million? Probably not. The problem is ours. How many of you have heard of House Bill 920? A few, good. A couple people, a couple hands. Okay, House Bill 920 has shaped public school funding since 1976. How many remember 1976? I should have some hands there, right? Do you remember what the gas lines were like? Remember that at gas stations, what was going on at gas stations? Does anybody remember what the inflation rate was in 1976? Anybody got a guess? It was actually knocking down 20%. It was real close to 20% at the height in 1976. What did that do to your house on paper? Is the value of your house increasing or decreasing at a 20% inflation rate? Actually, on paper, your house's the value is increasing because of the rate of inflation. So was that good for schools or bad for schools? I mean, would say bad. Listen, you got to participate, folks. I mean, come on, I'm killing myself out here. How many would say bad? Raise your hand. How many would say good? You're absolutely right. It was great for school. It was a boon of cash for schools. So Voinovich, who later becomes a senator, Senator Voinovich, who was a state legislator at the time, came up with House Bill 920. And what House Bill 920 says is that whenever you pass a levy, whatever millage rate you're collecting at that time, it's frozen. That created the cycle for school districts to be on the ballot, a few years later, back on the ballot, a few years later, back on the ballot. That's what it helped homeowners because it stopped their taxes from skyrocketing, but it forced schools to constantly have to come back to people, and that's what creates the confusion, I think, in the community, because, why are you coming back? Didn't you just pass a levy? And didn't we just pass a levy in 2009? Yes, we did. Passed a levy in 2009. So why are you back again? That's a fair question. Part of the answer is House Bill 920, but it's only part of the answer. But that's been the reality that we've lived in. Here's our cuts from the state. Tangible personal property tax. Tangible personal property tax is a tax on everything in a business, all the way from the trash cans in the office to whatever you have on your shelves out in the warehouse. We've known that it's been phased out. It's been phased out for, I think, the last 5 years, I believe, or 6 years. However, the Governor Kasich recently enacted legislation that sped the process up. So what did that mean to us? It was a loss of $1.6 million in loss of tangible personal property tax. Then electric deregulation change. Again, that might be good in the long run for all of us as consumers of electricity. However, in the interim, it's a loss to the school district, for our school district, of $1.5 million. Followed by a 9% cut in state and federal funding, coupled by declining home values. Now, remember I said House Bill 920 keeps it from going up, right? It also keeps the collections from going down, except for 4.8 mils for us, which is called inside millage. That goes up and that goes down. Historically, that has always gone up. It is now going down, so we're going to lose another $700,000. So our total cuts in state funding are almost $4.8 million. I think it's going to be closer to $5 million because I think the delinquency rate, which usually runs about 98%, meaning 98% of the people pay their taxes, 2% don't, for whatever reason, can't afford it, foreclosures, whatever. What do you think it stands to reason that that rate is going to decline? Collection rate will decline. When collection rate declines, so does our revenue stream. So it creates another problem. So I think it's probably going to be somewhere around $5 million. And remember, that compounds itself. So it's $5 million in this fiscal year, $10 million, $15 million, $20 million, and $25 million when you extrapolate that out over a 5-year revenue cycle. This is another interesting diagram. I think it illustrates where we kind of are, and you know it as a homeowner. Has anybody tried to refinance lately? Yeah, some folks did because the rates are really low, right? We tried to refinance. I bought my house in 2007. Just before, it was starting to go down, but not anywhere near the bottom. So, meaning I overpaid for my home. I also bought my home on a VA loan. Is anybody here a veteran? Have you ever bought a home on VA? Well, you know you can buy a home on VA with very little down. And that's what us poor people do, right? We buy homes with very little down, which is what I did. So in 2007, that worked out. But now my home is worth significantly less than what I paid for it. So I can't even refinance. And there's a lot of people in that position because I'm upside down on my house. If I tried to sell my house, I'd have to probably bring, I don't know, $10,000 or $15,000 to the table just to close, on top of whatever I made in selling it. So there's a lot of people in that position, and I understand that. But what this graph shows you is, it shows you the continual growth in home values in Willoughby Eastlake City School District, and within the district in all the 7 communities, constantly rising, constantly rising. So the school would get a little bit of boost every 2 years from that. Look what it projects out to be. It's actually declining, but ours will stay steady, but our inside millage will not. And that's where that $700,000 comes from. Couple that with rising costs in healthcare, transportation, insurance, utilities, all the things you know about that you deal with in your own homes. The unfunded mandates, you'll hear that word a lot. We have, how many of you have heard of the Ohio Corps? It's a shift to different standards, academic standards. Well, we are now shifting to national core standards. Did you know that? Did you know that the core academic content standards will be the same across the nation by 2014? Well, the consequence of that is additional staffing, and it's unfunded. In other words, there's no money being sent to local school districts to offset the cost of the national curriculum. Rising special education costs, and I can tell you that I'm a former special education teacher. It's clearly where my heart is, and I don't put that up there to make anybody feel bad, because I would submit to you that if you don't have a child with special needs, and you all of a sudden have a child with special needs, which could happen to anybody with one head injury away from that happening, you would want the best for your son or daughter, as I would want the best for my son or daughter. But the cost is, it's very steep and rising. So I showed you that slide before on House Bill 920 where our revenues were flat. And we've lived with that ever since I've been a superintendent. But that is not the case anymore. It is that perfect storm of events, rising expenditures that are very difficult to control and revenue that's declining. And that certainly doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we have problems. So let's take a look at our 5-year assumption, our 5-year forecast. Let's assume that the levy is going to pass, 4.99 mils. How many of you would assume if you decide to vote yes for this levy, and you can talk your neighbors into voting yes for this levy, how many of you would assume we'd be off the ballot for a while? How many would make that assumption? Well, I'm glad there's not that many hands up, because I would make that assumption if I were a taxpayer. 4.99 mils for Willoughby Eastlake City Schools is a high millage rate. Historically, anything over 4 mils has done what? Does anyone know? It has failed. It has failed. So one might ask, why is the new superintendent putting 4.99 mils on if he knows that it has historically failed? Is he an idiot, or you fill in the blank? And the answer is, you know how many mils we need to continue to do business as we are doing it and be fiscally solvent for 4 years, meaning in the black for 4 years, not back on the ballot for 4 years, which to me is a reasonable levy cycle. Do you know how many mils we need in order to accomplish that? We need almost 11 mils. How many of you would sign up to pass an 11 mil? Don't answer that question. But I would submit to you, I'll ask you, let me rephrase it. How many of you think the community and by 51% would sign up for 11 mils? I don't think so either. So this is what it looks like if we pass 4.99 mils and do nothing differently. The first fiscal year 12, which we're in right now, we would end with 6.7 million estimated. In fiscal year 2013, with about 400,000, then we'd be looking at 11.3, 27.7, and $48.5 million deficits. That's pretty staggering. That's with a passage. I don't even want to show you what it looks like with a failure. So we need to do what? Obviously we need to pass the levy, but that's not the full answer, is it? We need to do what on top of that? We've got to cut spending. We have to reduce our expenditures. So what we're in the process of doing right now, we are negotiating with our unions right now to take concessions, coupled with other things that we are doing to save more district funds. And our goal is $7 million. It's not our goal. We have to reach $7 million. Okay? And what I want to reassure you, and those cuts are coming from the superintendent to all the way down to everybody across the whole district, aides, custodians, teachers, administrators, principals, everyone. What's important to note, though, is that I want this to be done, and your student come to school next year and not notice a thing. They shouldn't. Your high school student, if you have high schoolers, no cuts in programmings, no cut in extracurriculars. These cuts are not coming on the backs of students, but rather on us, the employees. So, what does it look like if we pass the levy and make those $7 million in cuts? That's 4 years in the black, which is a reasonable levy cycle. So we have to make those $7 million cuts on top of a levy passage. So how much is enough in cash reserves? If you saw the last one, our cash reserves get pretty low. The state says, the Ohio Department of Education says, that we should have $23 million in cash reserves at all times. $23 million. There's a laugh. You should laugh, because that's not possible. We're not going to achieve $23 million in cash reserves. But what we do need to achieve is 4 years in the black. 4 years in the black. How much do you think it costs to run this school district for 1 hour? What would be your guess? What do you think? $25,000, not bad. That's a pretty good guess. It's about $40,000 an hour to run the school district. It's just a shade over $7.7 million to run the school per month. So it's an expensive venture to run this school district, no question. So how much would a 4.99 mil operating levy cost you? If you, and this is based on your assessed valuation, not market value, assessed valuation. But if you have, for every $100,000 of your home value, it's $152 a year. Is that insignificant? No, of course not. That is not insignificant. And for some folks, that's going to be difficult to do, and I understand that. I understand that. That is why the school district's not asking you to pay $300 or $400 a year. We're asking you to meet us in the middle. Meet us in the middle. The average home in our school district is now $138,000. I don't know where that falls for you personally. That would be, if you own a $138,000 home, that's $206 a year or $17 a month. Has the district been financially responsible? I think that's an important question to answer. I don't know if you can see this again, but my experience, I've got a guy who's looking down at the scale and he maybe needs to exercise a little bit next to a guy who looks like he's been exercising. In my experience, school districts they're not lean. They're not leanly operated. But I can assure you, and I'll show you some data that I think proves that I'm just not trying to sell a levy, that is the case here in Willoughby, Eastlake City Schools. You can't see this. It is on the website. You can see we're videotaping this. But this chart, this is from the Ohio Department of Education. It's on their website. It says expenditure per pupil. We are the lowest in Lake County at $10,925. Mentor's $12,100. Wycliffe, $12,500, Kirtland, $11,900, Painesville City, $12,000, and Perry, $13,200. So we're spending the least amount per student in the county, and that's one of the lowest in the entire state. How are we in our staffing issues? Our teacher-to-student ratio is 15.8 to 1. And if you compare that, we're larger than Mentor schools by about 400 students. We have 522 teachers. They have 549 teachers. The only school district with a higher ratio than us in student-to-teacher ratio is Perry. Administrators. For example, we have 26 administrators. Mentor has 41. Again, we're larger. We have 317.4 to 1 administrators to students. Mentor is 200 to 1, Wycliffe 143, Kirtland 87, Painesville 175.9. I don't know how you get a 0.9, maybe he just checks out in the afternoon, I don't know. And Perry 143.4. So you can see, staffing-wise, expenditures per student, we're by far the lowest. How about millage? Let's take a look at millage. That's a graph that illustrates millage. In other words, if you move to these communities, what would you be paying in voted millage? In Fairport, it's 85.4, Kirtland 73 mils, 73.7, Madison 60.47, Menor 77.61, the highest Painesville at 91, Perry, which is the lowest at 50, Riverside 60.57, Willoughby Eastlake 52.55, which is the yellow bar graph, second to the end, and Wycliffe at 67.31. Perry is lower than us only by 2 mils, but what does Perry have? It's being phased out if you follow the news. But what have they enjoyed for the last 20 years? The nuclear power plant. They haven't passed a levy in like 15 years. They haven't needed to. So that's why their millage rate is so low, and yet they're barely lower than us, even with the nuclear power plant. So staffing, expenditure per student, and voted millage, this district compares favorably to anywhere in the state. Anywhere in the state. How's the academic performance been? It must have declined, right? It must be lower than the other surrounding districts. Is that true? No, it's one of the highest rated school districts in the state again. So it's performed well and done it very efficiently. They've done all kinds of stuff, and I'm not going to read all these to you because I know I'm running out of time. But there have been many things that have been done in the past to reduce expenditures. That $7 million that I'm talking about is on top of what the district's done in the past. Some of those things up there have been eliminated administrative positions, increased health care, 0% pay raises for staff, just some of the stuff that maybe's been going on where you work. So those changes do not reflect the $7 million that we're asking for. Additionally, what would the effects of a failed levy be? Well, we'd be right back on the ballot again, right? The problem is, if we pass the levy this November, we collect when? Does anyone know? January, okay? If we don't pass in November, but then pass in May, when would we collect? In January 2013. So, no matter what, if this levy fails, even if we pass the very next time, we have to make $12.7 million in cuts. Folks, I can do $7 million, and I can ask our employees and administrators and teachers to chip in and do $7 million and not impact your students, but I can't do $12 million. I can't do $13 million. I can cut it, but we can also look like a very different school district. And where would those cuts be? I'll talk about fiscal caution in just a minute, but staffing reductions, building budgets, busing would certainly be a consideration to go to minimum busing, extracurricular activities, supplemental contracts, likely decrease in student programming. We'd have to make some very difficult decisions. Where am I going to circle the wagons? Core academics. How many of you think it's important for your students to be exposed to the fine arts, for example? I think it's important. But that would certainly have to be on the table, would it not? Not going to give up English, right? Can't do that. So those are all the things that have failed levy. Now, I don't say that to you to threaten you. I don't say that to you to scare you. I say that to you just so that you know what the consequences are. I think you have a right to know. It also said that we would go into fiscal caution, which we would. We're on the state watch list. They said it would take about 2 weeks to process the paperwork if we fail our levy, and we'll go into fiscal caution. However, since we're at $12.7 million deficit, we exceed what you'll see here. Fiscal caution says 2%, but not less than 8% deficit against your general fund. So we would skip right past fiscal caution, fiscal watch, and go right into fiscal emergency, which they said we'd be due by the spring. What that means is you are now in control, or the district is controlled by the auditor's office, the state auditor's office. They put a committee together. The committee comes to Willoughby Eastlake City Schools and slashes $13 million off the budget. Now, how many of you are comfortable with the state auditor's office making the change for your students? Anybody comfortable with that notion? I'm not. I want to make the changes that we need to make like a surgeon, not like a butcher. And what do you think they're going to do? They're just going to come in because they've got, you saw the colors on the screen. You think they have other schools that they need to deal with? The state auditor's office is going to be working hard, folks. They're going to be working hard. So they're going to be going quick. They're just going to bring in their little template and bang, make the cuts. And I don't think any of us want that. So what we need is to pass the levy and take those $7 million in reductions. We'll be fiscally solvent through 2015. Most importantly, it protects your students. It helps stabilize property value. If you were all to move tomorrow you got transferred to Pittsburgh, what would be the first thing you would do after you knew you had to live somewhere in the Pittsburgh area? What would the first thing you'd do? Well, you might try to sell your house, certainly. That might be the first thing, but I'll tell you the first thing I would do, I know I got to sell my house. I'm going online, I'm looking at the communities around Pittsburgh, and I'm going to figure out what schools are solid, in my opinion, based on the research I can find online. And that's where I'm going to start looking for a house. And I would submit most people are going to do that. So, people do that here. And I'm getting the motion to go quickly. So I'm going to keep rocking and rolling. But I do know this is what we can't do. If you can't see that, it looks like a school administrator with his head in the sand. We can't do that. This just is a slide that illustrates the link between property values and schools. And again, I don't think I need to preach to the choir that there is a link between property value and the performance of the school. 75% of the people out there, folks, 75% of the people do not have a child in school. That's a lot of people that have to vote yes who aren't directly benefiting from the increase in their taxes. But they're doing it because property value, hopefully because they believe in education. I hope those are the two main reasons that they vote positively. If you need more information, this presentation, which I know you all want to see again, please, and I know it's probably be downloaded, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. But if you want to go to our support site or our website, it's www.supportweschools.org. On there is this presentation, handouts, presentation schedules, anything you would need to review in order to talk to your neighbor, a place to direct your neighbor. And then there's vote yes at supportweschools.org, which is a email. If you have questions, click on that. You can go right on the website, click on it, and that'll shoot an email directly to the people that need to answer that question. Are there any, and I know you've got to get going. Outside on the table there are 2 things going on there. If you would be willing to volunteer, and when I say volunteer, I need about 200 people who are willing to give 2 hours one time. If you're willing to give 2 hours one evening, one time to help pass this levy, please sign up right outside at the table. And if you are not a registered voter, there's folks out there that can help get you registered. Or if you know you're going to be out of town and you need to vote absentee, there's somebody out there that can help you do that as well. Any quick questions I can answer before I get kicked off to the mic? Okay, no questions? It was so thorough, all your questions were answered? Or you just want to get the heck out of here? I think it's the latter. But if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll hang around here for a while to try to answer your questions at the table right outside the door. Thank you very much for coming. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.